So, when you think about Islamic marriage, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of people, the view is kind of narrow. But today, we're going to widen that lens. We're going to explore it not just as this serious sacred contract, but as something that's really built on joy, on community, and on some pretty deep spiritual ethics. All right, let's start with something that might surprise you. Picture this, a wedding, filled with joyful music, people singing. Does that sound like a traditional Islamic celebration to you? Well, what if I told you that the sources showed that the Prophet of Islam didn't just allow it, but actually encouraged it? Yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll talk about joy and celebration and its boundaries. Then we'll get into the whole idea of marriage as a sacred contract. After that, we'll touch on what kinds of marriages are actually forbidden. And we'll wrap up by looking at how important it is to start things off on a spiritual note. All right, first up, joy, celebration, and boundaries. We're going to see how the tradition actually pushes for public parties, but, and this is key, within some really clear and respectful limits. So check this out. This quote is amazing because of the story behind it. A relative of the Prophet's wife, Aisha, was getting married to a guy from the Ansar, the local community in Medina. And apparently the party was a little quiet. The Prophet noticed and basically said, "Hey, the Ansar are a people who love songs. You should have sent someone to sing for her." I mean, that's not just allowing joy, right? That's actively encouraging it. And it's so culturally aware. Okay, so what does that celebration actually look like? Well, there's a clear balance. On the allowed side, you've got things like playing the duff, which is a simple drum, halal singing, and just big, happy family get-togethers. But there are also clear limits. The lyrics can't be vulgar or immoral. You can't mix it with anything forbidden, like alcohol, and things like modesty are really important. It's like a framework for guided happiness, you know? And get this idea is so important that one hadith actually says the difference between a lawful marriage and an unlawful one is the song and the tambourine. Wow. So that music isn't just for a good time. It's the public announcement. It's what makes the marriage official and known to everyone. But all that public joy is built on something really serious. And that brings us right into our second section, the sacred social contract. This is where we get into the heavy stuff, the real weight of the marriage vows, and even the ethics of how you propose. The word for the marriage ceremony is nikah, and it's super important to get this. It's not just a romantic thing. It's a formal, binding contract. It has real legal and spiritual weight, and whatever conditions you agree to, well, you absolutely have to honor them. I mean, listen to this quote from the Prophet. It is so powerful and so direct. He's saying that the conditions you agree to in your marriage contract are the most worthy things to fulfill. Why? Because they're the very things that make the relationship lawful. This just elevates the whole thing from a simple promise to a sacred duty. And these ethics start way before the wedding, right at the proposal stage. There's some really clear rules here. First, you don't propose to someone who's already engaged to somebody else. Makes sense, right? And second, a woman can't ask a man to divorce his wife so she can marry him. These aren't just polite suggestions, they're there to prevent chaos and to protect the commitments people have already made. Okay, let's move on to our third section, forbidden types of marriage. The tradition is really specific about what makes a marriage valid and permanent, so now we're going to look at what doesn't count. So here are the two big ones. First, you have shigar, which is basically a swap marriage. A guy gives his daughter to another guy on the condition that he gets that guy's daughter in return and no dower is paid. Then there's muta, which is a temporary marriage, just for a set amount of time. The sources say this was allowed for a very short time in early Islam, like during long journeys or war, but it was later prohibited for good. So why are these forbidden? Well, it all comes down to a few key principles. Marriage is supposed to be stable and permanent. It's got to be respectful, not just a business deal. It absolutely cannot be exploitative. And this is a big one. The dower, or mahar, is the wife's right. It's a gift that belongs only to her, not some kind of bargaining chip. This was a huge deal for protecting a woman's economic agency. All right, this brings us to our final section, and it's a really beautiful one, starting with spiritual grounding. We've talked about the party, we've talked about the contract. Now let's talk about the spiritual foundation that's meant to hold the whole thing up right from the very beginning. It's recommended to start the ceremony with something called the khutbah al-hajah, which translates to the sermon of need. And this is way more than just a formality. It's a specific sermon where you praise God, you ask for his help, you state the testimony of faith. It's all about intentionally grounding this brand new marriage in a spiritual reality. And to show you just how important this is, check out this analogy from the prophet. He said any important speech that doesn't have the testimony of faith is like a hand cut off. Think about that. It's incomplete. It's broken. So to start something as huge as a marriage without that spiritual acknowledgement, you're starting with a massive piece missing. So when you pull all of this together, what do you get? You get a really clear philosophy, especially in the Hanafi school of thought. It's all about balance. It's a middle path. It's not so strict that there's no joy, but it's not so loose that anything goes. The whole goal is to create this framework for a marriage that's built on dignity, stability, and just moderation. All right, so let's recap the big takeaways here. 1, make your marriage public. 2, celebrate, but do it within halal limits. 3, respect that marriage contract. It's a serious deal. 4, propose with ethics and respect. 5, no temporary or exploitative marriages. And finally, number 6, start the whole thing off with remembrance of Allah. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. You know, our modern world has all these shifting ideas about relationships and what commitment means. So how does this Islamic framework, this balance of joy, rules, and faith, how does that challenge our modern views? Or maybe, how could it inform them? It's definitely something to chew on.